am excited today to be with Ruud Janssen. He is from Switzerland in the Swiss Alps. He is actually a player of the Alp horn. You've probably seen those played. They can be heard for miles across the Alps. He is the co-creator of the Event Campus. He's written a book. He has been helping people with event design. He calls himself a polyglot, which we have that in common, which means he likes many different things. So we could have many different conversations, but we're not. We're going to talk all about event design today. So welcome to the show, Ruud.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's a treat to be here.
So I want to talk. Well, let's do this. Let's go into the Alphorn, and then we'll go to event design. Why
Yeah,
did you
why not?
decide to pick that up later in life? Because that's a feat in and of itself.
It is. Yeah, I remember last time we spoke, Phil, was live was in Las Vegas, was it?
It was in Vegas at IMEX. Yes,
And we
sir.
had you on our podcast, and I remember, we ended up, as people do when they're geeky about music, you end up speaking about music and talking about these things. To me, music is one of those things you do. It's a language that's so universal that it's something that in my family I grew up with. My dad was a musician. Always, we're all amateurs in that respect, right? My brother is an active musician. Um, um, I play various instruments, but I played the trumpet for a long time. And then when I moved to Switzerland, I noticed that being with friends and playing music in a certain setting at a certain level with a group of people that you're playing with for a long time, if you then move to a different place, it's really kind of hard to find your community of like-minded musicians that like the same kind of music that happen to be looking for a trumpet player, and the last but not least that can put up with my terrible travel schedule.
Mm.
Which means I'm not a very reliable musician. um, Meaning that I basically stopped making music for quite some time, and that was not a good thing, I think, for me. And at some point, I had a fascination for the Alphorn. I just love the sound of it. I think it's something that's so universal. When you play that and when you hear it, it just evokes a certain emotion, I think, in people and in animals for that matter. And it's one of the earliest iPhones without you having to use batteries, right? So it can communicate across long distances, multiple kilometers, depending on the weather.
Mm.
And it's all natural harmonics, right? So if you're able to picture the sound in your head of what should come out the other end of the Alphorn, and this thing is like 3 meters, let's say about 10 feet long. Um, if that sound that comes out the other end travels so many kilometers and it's not the right sound, then it should be illegal to play that in public because it sounds kind of awkward. So I started practicing that about 8-9 years ago, with a mentor here, with a teacher, and he said, "Oh, you have a natural aptitude. You must be a horn player." I said, "Yeah, I played the trumpet for over 30 years, but then I stopped for quite a number of years." And it's become a real kind of thing where you connect to a community here in Switzerland. I made many friends playing the Alphorn. We got to travel with it. We broke a Guinness Book of World Records recently, bringing 1,006 Alphorns together on the side of a mountain. And we played one tune for 5 minutes straight. And now we made an entry into the Guinness Book of World Records.
That sounds like a record. It also sounds like it could have been cacophony if you weren't all playing the same notes in the same song. Was it actually melodious?
It was. The Swiss take their instruments very seriously, and they practice and rehearse very seriously. And we played this one song called Bentley Alp, which is a very classic Alphorn tune in three different, um, let's say, voicings. And we had to play it for 5 minutes, and none of the Alphorn songs usually last 5 minutes. So we had to play it twice in a row, slowly. And there was a conductor in the front, and imagine 1,000 people on a bunny slope on a mountain. And he had really big ping pong bats, kind of like the way they conduct, when they have airplanes coming into
Right.
to the manual thing. That's the way he was conducting us. And it actually, I was afraid it would be really loud, being surrounded by 1,005 Alphorns, including myself. But it was actually very pleasant because it was in the open air, and the magnificence of projecting that over the mountains, over the lakes here in Switzerland was, yeah, it was pretty majestic.
So, you know that I talk all about unforgettable events. That right there is unforgettable. I mean,
Oh,
imagine
totally.
being on the mountains across from it, take all the logistics involved with pulling that together. You're trying to make it a
Totally.
great experience for the musicians because that is tough to keep 1,000 people organized. Like that's very
Absolutely.
uncommon, whether you're a singer in a marching band, anything. 1,000
Yeah.
people keeping them all together is a task. And then something like the alp horn, which is a challenging instrument, I'm sure, just to even make a sound, let alone play together with others.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's a lot. Let's
It
use that as a go ahead and make a comment on that if you'd like to.
No, absolutely. And I've got to say, the ones that put together that event masterfully did it. They send personalized itineraries with the exact train schedule to each and every participant and their partner. It was all sponsored. The gondola that brings you up has a capacity of about 80 people. And imagine trying to get 1,000 people up a mountain in the morning in order to then perform all at the same time. And everybody was fed a three-course meal, and got a specific allocated spot with a QR code, which had to be justified by the Guinness Book of World Records in order to then be supervised by, I think, 18 professional musicians and composers who had to verify whether every player was actually playing and that there were no, let's say, stand in Alphorn players. So it was quite impressive. I've got to say that, leave an organization like that and clockwork up to the Swiss and they'll figure it out for you.
Well, that's an interesting observation too of if you're going to try to set a Guinness Book of World Records at an event, which I know people who have tried, know people who have succeeded. There is a
Yep,
lot of planning that goes into that. Today's
absolutely.
not about doing that though, because most of us will never do that at our events and maybe shouldn't
Yeah.
even achieve or attempt it. But I want
Mhm.
to ask you, let's go back in time. When did you realize that you wanted to get into this world of helping others design their events better? And what was happening that made you realize a methodology needed to be created?
Yeah, that's if you look back, probably this has been in the back of my mind for a long time. Um, when my colleague Rolf Frissen and myself, and later joined by Dennis Lyer, when we found each other actually by volunteering within MPI, Meeting Professional International, in volunteer leader roles, we actually came across the fact that many people want a seat at the table and want events to be taken very seriously, but how can you be a serious profession if you don't have serious tools? And so one of the painful points, but also illuminations that I had when I was on the international board of MPI, I met a guy called Alex Osterwalder who created the business model canvas out of a PhD thesis that was about as thick as a phone book, um, and he reduced it all down into one piece of paper. And that mental model is something that we used with the MPI International Board to kind of figure out how value creation happens in an association. And so we started applying that to events and figuring out, are events really temporary businesses? And although it did work, and we've, over 4 or 5 months, we really kind of worked through this together with my colleague Rule. We also defined and noticed that there's a recurring problem for events, and that's very often that the event owner can very enthusiastically say we should do an event, right? But then once somebody says that, there's a team of people that look that person in the eye and have to try and figure out what's happening in that person's prefrontal cortex, because apparently they're thinking we should do an event, but what is bubbling up on the inside of their brain
Mhm.
is really hard for them to articulate. I would probably compare it, with, Phil, you as a musician know that, we could be musicians without ever reading a piece of sheet music, and that would be fine, right? We could make great music without sheet music. But how cool would it be if we have an ability to compose and an ability to translate what's in this event owner's head, get a team of people to think about how that could best be done, and crack the challenge of how events create value very succinctly and um, very deliberately as a team of people. And so this is how we came up with this idea of maybe there is a way in which we could do that on a single piece of paper. And the same Alex Osterwalder with his team, Yves Pigneur and others, they had a business design summit in Berlin, and he was the event owner of that. And Um, and when they brought together 250 of the geeks around the business model canvas in Berlin, the summit sold out in a couple of days. So you had 250 people paying 2,000 euros, half a million in his pocket. And because I'd gotten to know him through MPI, I had lunch with him about 2 months before the event. And I looked him in the eye over lunch, and I could tell there was something in his demeanor there was something bugging him. I said, Alex, what's wrong? And he said, you know what? I'm actually angry at my own event. And that's when it occurred to me that owning an event can be painful. He said, you know what? My team, I've sold out all these tickets. 250 people are coming. You guys have bought 2 tickets. And all my team can talk about, they should be programming for, our strategizer software. But all they can actually talk about is this stupid event, And it wasn't a stupid event because his top 250 people got together and his peers. But I could tell he was upset at his own event. And he was actually nervous on making it happen. And his team got completely distracted just talking and thinking about this event instead of building the software they needed to build in their business. And then he asked me the question, which as a former hotelier, I would normally say yes to, which is, could you help us figure this out? And then I said, no, which is what he had taught us to say, well, if you find a pain point in someone, grab it, take a knife, stick it in between the ribs, add some salt, and then very slowly pull it back out. So I said, you know what, Alex? No, I'm not going to help you. And my colleague Roel and I are going to come to your event. And we know a thing or two about events, as you know. But what we can do is we can analyze the event and see how it goes. And we can report back to you after the event what we thought of the event. How does that sound? This made him even probably more anxious and more angry and more upset at his own event. But we gave him some of his own medicine, which he really appreciated. I said, but in return, what I'd like to ask you and your team, because he said, yes, that's a good idea. And then afterwards, I will invite you to a workation that we're having with our team. And he was writing his second book at the time about the value proposition canvas. And so we went after the event, we went to that workation. And so I said, we will do that on one condition, that we can hold up something we're working on called the event canvas. I would like to ask your team, because you have developed a competency in creating mental models and frameworks, to maybe pull the arms and the legs out of our little baby that we've created gently, right? So that we can optimize the way that we would create a single piece of paper to articulate how events create value. And the calling for that event was actually creating tools for toolsmiths, right? So how can you take a mental model, something that everybody can look at and work with as a team, and how could you bring that into your own vertical? So interestingly enough, the work that we're doing at the Event Design Collective, which we already started before we considered doing this event canvas, that work actually stemmed out, and the resolution of it and the improvements on it actually came as a result of us being part of this event and interacting very closely with him and his team in developing the best possible mental model in our vertical to demonstrate how events create value on a single piece of paper. So really that was the long answer to a short question.
Well, there's a couple things you said that I think are fascinating. Our musical background is an interesting reference point because all musicians who at least have been trained classically, who read music, can play a piece of music without ever having been with each other before because we understand the common language.
Correct.
And what you were describing in that event owner, he didn't have the language to articulate what he wanted to see happen. He just knew he'd been to events probably and wanted to create an event. And so being able to create common language is what it sounds like you're doing. But then secondly, you're creating a score that in a single glance, everybody can be on the same page. I'm sure there's a lot behind that single page, a lot of thought, but I don't know if you would call it a dashboard. That's kind of what I'm thinking of. It's like this one place everybody can look. We understand what's there and we can be in agreement, or we can discuss, you know what, that's not quite our vision. Is that kind of the way it's supposed to work?
Yeah. And the problem we're looking to solve, because that was the first thing that we were trying to figure out, was really this thing, and I'm just holding up a little piece of paper here that says the one question we're obsessed with is how does your event create value, right? Because anybody that's an event owner and says we should do an event, their obsession is usually, or should be, how does that create value? Not just for the event owner, but for all of the other stakeholders that are part of this event. And then the second point that you alluded to, Phil, is this idea that, you know, we could come from completely different backgrounds, not even speak each other's language except for sheet music. We could sit in an orchestra and we could probably play Beethoven's Fifth together, right, with a bit of rehearsal, or any piece of music that somebody composed based on the ability to read, you know, à vue, the sheet music.
Right.
Providing you master your instrument, obviously that might be an additional
Questionable.
cost. So if we're obsessed with how does your event create value, which many people are obsessed or should be obsessed with, because they are time-consuming devices, right? Then the other thing that people are obsessed with in organizations is this thing that we pasted to the bottom of it, which says to craft, quantify, and celebrate progress over time,
Hmm.
right? So it's how does your event create value? To craft, quantify, and celebrate progress over time. That's what many organizations are after. And then the hardest thing when you do that is we all know an event doesn't live in isolation between an event owner and whoever else. There's a team that needs to pull this thing off. And so the ability for a mental model to get, you know, to do what it's supposed to do. And here's where the event canvas is for anyone that needs to get everyone on the same page when it comes to an event, right? So is it a dashboard? No, I think it's more, dashboard could be considered a part of it. It's really a way to create a narrative together with a group of people to get their brains to collaborate together. So it's almost like composing music together or composing your event together, but from different stakeholder perspectives. Meaning, if you're the event owner, Phil, of this podcast, and I'm a guest on your podcast, and we have a listener on your podcast, or multiple listeners, and we have YouTube as a streaming platform and Riverside that's recording it, all of these are stakeholders in our event. And we all have a different narrative as to what our entry behaviors is, what our exit behavior is, what our pains are as we get in, our expectations before the event, how we want to walk away from the event, what the gains are as a result of being in this event, what the level of satisfaction is, offset against the expectation. All right, so that's what we call the change. There's 6 different elements that you can actually, as a group of people, stick Post-its on a wall from that one stakeholder perspective and create those different elements. And that's the change that creates the value. The second thing you need to know, second part, is what we call the design frame. These are all the restrictions that you have when it comes to the event from that stakeholder's perspective. So the commitment is one of them, commitment in time. I just said this podcast will take 45 minutes. And then you will post-record on your alto saxophone or another saxophone, I don't know, something that you will collate with it, right? So commitment in time, the expected return post-event. And then we have costs, right? Fixed costs and variable costs that might be related to this. And there's a revenue opportunity sometimes for events. And then on top of that, we have events can get jobs done, right? Functional jobs, social jobs, emotional jobs, and basic needs. And an event has a promise, right? If you know what the promise of an event is, the promise of that event I was speaking about before that Alex Osterwalder did, the promise was more learning in 2 days than in the rest of your year.
Wow, that's a big promise.
When I first saw that promise, I thought, what an arrogant fill in the blank, right?
Right.
How does this guy know what I learned in a year and pretend to teach me more in 2 days? At the same time, I knew this guy. I'd read his book. I've met him in person. I couldn't wait to pull out my credit card, swipe it, have 2,000 euros paid for me and 2,000 for my colleague, and said, you know what? We're going to Berlin for 2 days, and we're going to check this thing out because it's probably going to deliver on its value, right? So the event promise should be very succinct and triggering for you to say, this is how this thing creates value. So that the second part, right, which are 6 different elements, right? Commitment, return, the cost, the revenue, the jobs to be done, and the promise. Those are all the design restrictions. Those are all the things that lock in the final design. Okay. Meaning, you know, and they have to overlap between the different stakeholders. But each stakeholder has a unique set of restrictions. Restrictions are God-given to designers, because without restrictions, it's really hard to design.
Yep.
The last part that I haven't spoken about, the third thing, is what we call the prototype. And that consists, I'm holding up a little hourglass here for a second. The hourglass of how time passes, right, doing an event, is actually the experience journey of all the steps you go through as a result of being part of this event. And then all of the sand that falls into the bottom part is the instructional design, right? What are the skills, knowledge, attitude, and people learning that happen at your event during the duration of your event? And so if you look at the makeup of the event canvas, which people can download under Creative Commons in 18 languages, it's been translated by our community, they will see that there's 14 boxes for change, frame, and then the last part, the hourglass, is the prototype as to how the event will actually function. And usually there's not just one prototype. An event could be done in many ways, right? So there's usually multiple hourglass options that an event owner can choose from. Or the event owner can actually say, you know what? Between option A, B, and C, there's an option D, which is I'm not doing the event, right?
Yeah.
But then you need to be able to articulate what behavior will not get changed as a result of not doing the event. And so the basic premise and mechanism of how events create value is through behavior change. And that's why we're obsessed with that question of behavior change, because it's the only thing that creates value at events.
And does it help you make that choice D of, you know what, an event is not the best way to create the change that you're wanting
Yeah.
to make?
Yeah. An event is just a complicated interaction between two or more stakeholders, right? So our definition is very simple. Two or more stakeholders interact in a certain way. And as a result, some behavior gets changed, hopefully in the desired direction of change, right? Now, if you know what that is, then you can determine how much time that takes, what the restrictions are, what the minimum conditions are to make that happen, et cetera, right? And then there's always multiple ways in which you could do that, right? 250 people could travel to Berlin and spend 2 days together with Alex Osterwalder and his 12 compatriots who have, this brainchild called the event or the business model canvas. Or that could be done differently, right? There's many ways in which we could do events, and this is what our communities are so good at, is we have all these examples and a very rich repository in our prefrontal cortex, because we've seen a few of these things.
Right.
We might even have organized them, right? Or we might have spoken at them, and everybody has opinions about events. They're like restaurants or like banks or like telephone
Music.
providers, right?
We
We
all-
all have opinions about them.
Absolutely.
We're all experts.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the change is the first part of your model, but you said even before that, how do we create value and how do we measure value? I guess would be one of the things I would ask, because at the
Yeah.
end of it, you're going to be measuring the impact, which is, did this change take place? There's financial ways that you measure it. Did you
Mhm.
make more, is it a good return on your investment? If you're having multiple events, did people sign up to come back? What kind of score did they give you on an NPS or something along those lines?
Yeah.
Are you deciding that right up front as you create the value, saying, okay, how are we going to know if we succeeded? Where does that fit
It's
into the mix?
yeah, it's totally part of the design process. So in the first step, when we spoke about, the entry behavior, the pains, and the expectations, those are things before the event even takes place.
Mhm.
Then you design for success. So the exit behavior should be the intended behavior after successfully having delivered the event for that specific stakeholder. Then you have gains, which should relieve the pains, right? And then you have a level of satisfaction. The satisfaction is always offset against the expectation. So when a group of people articulates what the expectations are, the level of satisfaction that you come up with that same group of people in the design process are the metrics, which could be the NPS, Net Promoter Score. It could be offset against the expectation. If you expect to get 10 leads out of an event and 3 new pieces of business and have dinner with 2 clients, then your metric of success of satisfaction could be well, I reached that minimum of my expectation plus 5% more, or whatever it might be. So setting the metrics of success is part of the design process right from the get-go. It's all baked into the same thing, right? The marketing promises, the jobs that get done, the budget that's required, the time that is needed, the jobs that gets done, all those elements that you normally need to formulate for your messaging, for your event, for your narrative from that stakeholder perspective, come out of the design process. So if you design it once and use this methodology, not only is it really fun to do, but it's a collaborative effort. So a group of people do it together, and you crack the problem, and then all of a sudden that group already owns it, and that's the nucleus, that's the starting group that creates the starting point for the event. The event actually starts with the event design,
Absolutely.
and
I don't
from
know
there
if
it
you
grows, right? It grows into what it could be.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you notice this? This is my experience that a lot of people say, I want to have an event. They look at several events that they've been to and they just jump into making it.
Yeah.
And some of the things that you're slowing down to ask are assumed, intuited, not articulated, or maybe there's some of them, some elements that they have articulated, but they haven't done it in a holistic way. And so not everybody knows what is it
Mm.
that we're trying to build. It's not fully fleshed out, and it's a little bit more of Indiana Jones if you've watched those movies of I don't know the answer. I'm making this up as I go. I feel
Yeah.
like a lot
Yeah.
of times that's what happens with events. Is that part of why this is a super helpful tool?
Well, I think one of the things you need as an event owner in order for your head not to explode, um, is to have a decision making rubric. You need a tool to make decisions, right? I'm sure our listeners and yourself, Phil, as you're sharing that story, recognize all of their own event expeditions that they've gone on. Um, and as you get closer to the event, or as things happen during the event or after the event, um, every time, if you have to go up the tree for the decision to be made by the event owner for every single thing that needs to happen, that person is basically, um, they're under a lot of pressure all the time. One of the outcomes of a design process is that if you have the narratives from multiple stakeholder perspectives, and you know the entry and exit behaviors of the different key stakeholders that you want to delight, you don't design for all of the stakeholders, just the one that have high power and high interest over the overarching aim of where you're trying to go. Which means you could have 16 different stakeholders, but maybe there's only 4 that you need to delight. You don't forget about the other 12, but those 4 you want to delight are front center in your kind of your decision making matrix. And the only thing used to make decisions, to assess whether an idea is good or bad, or to take any kind of executive decision or operational or tactical decision, um, is what we call the event delta. Basically, per stakeholder, we would identify 3 entry behaviors, 3 exit behaviors. And between the 3 entry and 3 exit behaviors, each of these behaviors would match up, and there would be a delta in the middle. Meaning, if the entry is this and the exit is that, what's the change that needs to happen in the middle? Now, getting to that change is quite difficult, but that's the design goal. That's part of the process that we, as a group of people, do that. It's fairly easy to come to that, but doing that on your own is fairly impossible. That delta is your decision-making rubric. So if you have 4 stakeholders with 3 behaviors each, that means there's 12 different behaviors, and there will be 12 post-its that guide all your decisions. And whenever you have an idea or you need to take a decision, you hold the decision up against that delta and go, does it do any of these things? Is it going to hamper us from doing any of these things? That's a way to take a decision about whether something is relevant or not to the event. So really, a design process is also a very helpful tool for decision making as the event deploys, right? From preparations to budgeting to vendor selection to running whatever you need to do. Decisions about content, decisions about technology, decisions about, it basically helps you take all the decisions. And it helps you filter out all the stuff you need to take away that's not necessary, that will not add value.
Yeah, I like that because it is easy to get enamored even if you're one of those stakeholders and you've got one idea, one solution, it's like, well, I want to do this.
Yeah,
And you have a hard time seeing that it doesn't accomplish one of those three goals that you have.
exactly.
Um, or even, like you said, the desire to take everything up the food chain to the event owner when they don't really have time. If you can communicate these things clearly, then people can make their own decisions much more easily.
Yeah.
Is 3 a magic number in terms of, like, the changes that you want to accomplish through the event, or what would you suggest in terms of that? Because I know there's a number that's too many, and maybe
Yeah.
there's a number that's too few, but what would you say is the magic number? Is there one?
So it's the art of boiling it down to the syrupy goodness, right? So when we design with a group of people, typically we have teams of 7 people that design a cycle for, let's say, analyze one of the stakeholders, and they would come up with a narrative, and they summarize that in 3 minutes. And out of those 3 minutes come 3 entry behaviors, 3 exit behaviors, and 3 changes for one of the stakeholders. Let's pretend you have 3 or 4 or 5 stakeholders you want to delight. That's a number of post-its I could try to remember, or at least hang on to when I take design decisions. Right? That's kind of the thing you keep going back to. Now, the art of design is really about taking away stuff and not about adding stuff. Right? I was just in Florence with my kids on a road trip on vacation, and if you would go to see David, the massive statue that's carved out of marble, um, the initial marble block, David was already inside.
Yeah.
Right? The only thing that the artist had to figure out is, what do I take away to reveal David? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the art of taking away stuff to leave over the genius that's inside. And that's the art of design. It's really about simplification and taking things away to the minimum essence so that what's left does exactly what it's supposed to do.
So I get the David analogy, but I think I just heard you say something that conflicts in my brain.
Mhm.
So let's say there's the 4 stakeholders. Each of them have 3 changes that they
Yeah.
want to create. Now we're up to 12.
Yeah,
12 is a lot to
it
accomplish
is. But
within
and
an event. Go ahead.
the thing the thing to think about is every decision could impact multiple stakeholders, right? The whole fact, the whole reason why events are so complex but also so valuable is because they are complex interactions of multiple stakeholders. The pain of the one could be the gain of another, right? Then you have a value proposition. Look at the classic hosted buyer system of a trade show like IMAX, for instance, right? Where you have people that want to find the buyers, and you have buyers that want to, go shopping for their needs in event land, right? Um, the pains and the gains are complementary, and you could design finding the overlap between, okay, what's the kind of commitment in time people are willing to make? What jobs are they trying to get done? What are their expectations? What are their entry, their exit behaviors? If you look at it from a single stakeholder perspective, one at a time, very simply, and you simplify those stories first, and then you stack them back together to then get a group of people to prototype possible solutions. And prototyping usually happens in teams of 2, because teams of 2 really make very powerful prototypes quickly. In our design process, the analysis part probably takes 75% of the time. The actual designing only takes 25% of the time,
Hmm.
right? So if a stakeholder analysis of one stakeholder would take about an hour, and you do 4 of those, 4 hours, maybe 15 minutes ahead of time doing a stakeholder alignment exercise. After you do that, you really need a good night's rest, because you will have recapped all of the videos of the different stakeholders, and you can synthesize that information, create the deltas, the behavior changes. Then the next day, and this is part of our event design certificate program, where people learn how to become facilitators of the process. On the third day, after people slept overnight, they have even more ideas, because all the ideas get locked up in an idea quarantine. The next day, we repeat the recaps of what we recorded the day before. We get people to transcribe them. We read them out one more time in audio to each other. We review all of the deltas, those 12 that you were just mentioning, and ask people the question, can we design for that?
Mm.
because that's the litmus proof of whether what's on that post-it is designable or not, right? Is it concrete enough? Once you have that and you send people off to go rapid prototyping, or we give them rounds of 13 minutes, 17 minutes, some odd number, and we do it really quickly, one after the other in rounds. And recently we've added something new where we say we're going to do an evil genius round and now design a prototype, which is going to do the exact opposite and not going to do any of these things.
Yep.
But your event owner might think that they're really fun options,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Just to bring out the evil in people's brain of, yeah, this is what we normally do at events, right? After 2 or 3 of those rounds, and you get teams of 2 to come back and debrief to each other, and they can steal from each other's idea, et cetera, and build on it. By the time you get to the 3rd or 4th round of rapid prototyping, 2, 3 hours later, you will have probably 3 or 4 phenomenal prototypes. And then all you have to do is hold those up against your event owner and ask them, or wait for them to reflect on which prototype they like best. And the best event owners then go back and say, now that the team has done all this analysis, what do you as a team think will change these behaviors most effectively? Which prototype does this team feel is going to work best? So basically, the event owner doesn't have to do a thing. They just have to listen to the expertise of the team that collaborated on creating and applying design thinking to the creation of an event. And then it's a really fun process because they're already on board because it's their story.
Yeah. So the stakeholder owner, I think it sounds like those are almost the same thing. They're really only part of the initial interviews and then coming back to analyze the prototypes and see which
Yeah.
of them best satisfies their concerns. And ideally, one of them does the most. It may not hit everybody's marks, but it
Yeah.
hits as many of them as possible. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, what's interesting there is that basically the event owner ideally doesn't get involved in the actual event design. They validate at certain points, right? So
Sure.
exactly as you said, you would do a stakeholder long listing and figure out who to delight, get the stakeholder to come in and say, do you agree with the overarching aim and the fact that these are the stakeholders we really need to delight? Validate, never go back, right? And then say, thank you very much. Go back to your mind your business and we will keep on designing. And then the team goes and does the analyses. After the analyses, what is interesting is if the team goes back and validates the stakeholder perspective with a number of the actual stakeholders, right? So you can take the narratives you created and go to a number of these people and ask them, here's what we think you're thinking, right? We've done an hour's worth of thinking with 7 people, and here's our 1 minute or 2 minute debrief video of what we think you are going through with respect to this event. Would you mind taking a look at it and spotting the 10 differences? And people love that, right?
Oh, interesting.
So they don't look at a blank sheet of paper. No, they look at the work of what the group has just done. And all I need to do is to spot the 10 differences. Oh, it's very good. You thought of this. And I really like, yeah, that's very true. And I definitely need that. But you know what? You forgot this thing. And this thing is really important to me at whatever that might mean. Right. And then you enrich the story, you fine tune it further. And then you have stakeholder validation as you go along before you start designing for the actual prototypes. So it's a very rigorous system and it's fail proof. We've been using it for over 12 years, and it's being used to design some of the most impactful events on the planet. Right. So organizations like the International Olympic Committee use this to design their events. IEEE is doing an event in. We designed that with them in Hawaii last year. We actually got during a plenary session of their IEEE convene, where 220 of their top people in their events got together. We took a full day of their plenary session and designed for 13 different stakeholders whilst we were at their event in their plenary session for the most important new event they're doing in October of this year around climate change. And people
Um,
enjoy it.
yeah, I love the robust nature of your methodology because I think this is what is missing in the planning stage. We do get into the basically building the event without a lot of thought on what needs to go in the blueprint, and you're
Yeah.
methodically helping to extract the vision that all these different stakeholders might see, like a good architect would do, and then say, okay, let's build the blueprint in light of what you're saying. And you've got a methodology that helps for events do that. So
Yeah.
look at you. You're going to show a picture here.
So the canvas in itself is like that sheet music, right?
Yep.
Just dropping it into the screen for a second, just so people have an idea what it looks like. It's very simple. You see that hourglass in the middle. You see, the 3 steps from entry to exit. You see the frame around the hourglass in the middle, which are all the design restrictions. So really what it is like, color in by numbers. That's really what it is. And once you're able to do that effectively and you split, the 3D story into a 2D problem, right? So you take entry exit behaviors, all the design restrictions, and then you take the actual hourglass of how you could actually do that event. What it really is just a very simple, it doesn't look so simple on this little screen, but imagine that all of the steps that you're seeing on screen right here are basically systematically how a team goes through this process. And we have a facilitation kit with role cards and a facilitation method that people can learn about when they become certified event designers. And actually, this is now being taught in universities, right? So we have a young professionals program where now in 35 universities across the planet, this is being taught to people in bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. And we are getting these people now coming into our profession who are proficient at, taking a challenge, this challenge of, blaming and duct taping an event together to saying, okay, let's stop this foolishness, and roll around in the problem long enough on the front end so that by the time we start, figuring out how the spaghetti works in practice, now we actually have a systematic way of going from the spaghetti part, right over here. Sorry, it's in mirror image. The spaghetti part where we're confused about what it actually represents to actually figuring out what are our options for the actual event in order to reach the overarching aim of the organization on the top of that mountain, right? So yes, I think it's a visual language, it's a common language, and it's not rocket science. All you have to do is allow yourself to stop and think for a minute and not run and start booking venues and projectors and bands and all the stuff you think you need, but just stop and think for a moment as to what's the size of the marble block, what's inside of the marble block, and how do I take away the pieces that shouldn't be there.
Yeah,
That's the art of event design.
it took Michelangelo to be able to see David in that marble block. What you're doing is making it easier for us to be like him, to be the great master artist, as opposed to just having a fuzzy idea of what the event's going to look like. So I think the methodology is fantastic. Just real fast, evil genius, because I love this idea, because it's a question that I've wanted to ask on every episode, but not everyone's ready to do this. But to me, it's almost like, what are 10 things you could do to kill an event, right? What are the things that you could do to make sure we don't accomplish these objectives that you had? It sounds like that's the question. Do you present your answers to the stakeholders? Like, that's a fun exercise, but what do you do with that?
Phil, I gotta admit, we've had very interesting learnings around this thing when we started doing the different parts of the planet. We do our trainings across the globe, and the evil genius round works miracles, right? People are innately born to sabotage stuff. Right? People are really good at this. The only place where it doesn't work, and this is by trial and error, is when you then record that and people get exposed for all the evil genius ideas they have. So we never record those rounds. That's one thing. And when we do them in corporate settings, we do a lot of training with the team at Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. And there people find it very difficult to be evil geniuses when their bosses are around, right? So I do think what it does to the team is it really relieves a lot of the pressure. It also just they're always the most fun rounds. They always lead to the laughter, and you see all the, event design brings the good and the bad and the ugly out in people, and that's a moment when the pressures are high, and you're going to that final round of prototyping, and this really kind of relieves that pressure and the team has a lot of fun with it. And after that, all of the puzzle pieces fall into play because people see the opposite truth, and then can deduct what should actually be happening.
At one point in time, I was going to write a book, 10 Things Not to Do. As an event planner, one of my editors said, no one's going to buy that. It's really fun to write, but who's going to buy that? Maybe it's a blog post, but it would never sell in the Amazon or in a bookstore. But I think it's a very fun exercise to do of, what are 3 or what are 10 things we could do to totally sabotage our event? And now how do we do the opposite? I think it's a great question.
Exactly. Yeah. We've actually, because that was one of the questions one of our clients asked at one point. They were engineers and they're building the future of semiconductors and photonics. And the first question these engineers asked us was, what are the top 10 reasons why events fail? And it was a very serious question.
Hmm.
And to our dismay, we didn't have the answer except for anecdotal evidence or things that we could probably pull out of our sleeve, the way that you were just mentioning that. And
Right.
we've taken that ask very seriously. So 4 years ago now, at IMEX in Frankfurt, we set out on an expedition to research this, and we've built a diagnostic, which is called the Event Design Competency Diagnostic. People can take that. I'm happy to send you the link so people can fill out the diagnostic. And what we're doing there is we are identifying what are the top 10 reasons why things in event design go sour or events go sour. And it very often has to do with the interaction between the event owner and the event design team. The pillars that are part of that, and I'm happy to share that link as well with you. When people fill out the diagnostic, they get a report card. And on the north axis is the lack of dialogue, on the east axis, the lack of vision, on the south axis, the lack of perspective, and on the west axis, the lack of empathy. And each quadrant has a specific type of environment that people might recognize, things like the chit-chatless enterprise, or the no see no talk Inc., or the blind spot limited, or the empathy void corporation, right? Because we all know instinctively where things go wrong. We just have to be able to put our finger on it as a team. And if you do this as a team diagnostic, it really takes the pressure out of the air of just naming it, right? But also having an option to say, okay, well, here's our blind spot in our competency of designing events. Here's a way in which we can design ourselves out of that situation. Because now there is a systematic approach that you can use to together take away those blind spots and make sure that the collective brain power of a group of people gets put to use to create the best possible event designs.
I love that you created that tool because it is a very common question, and I didn't know there was a way to diagnose that. So thank you for whoever the engineers were who challenged you with that question.
These were the people at Photonics that did that, and we were very grateful for it. And you know, this is how we came up with that diagnostic. I'm just sharing it on the screen real quick, just to have an idea of, you know, when you get it back. This I don't know if you can see that.
Not yet.
But the what happens is the diagnostic basically gives you a radial diagram of where you're at roughly. And if you're in the yellow zone, then that's a place where you can pay attention, and there's certain tips and triggers there to indicate that. We'll share the link in the show notes, and maybe, you know, that's something people can then investigate. Together with IMEX, MPI, IAEE, SITE have supported this research because we want to know, you know, what's at the cause of an event failure. And it's not about pointing at a specific person. It's identifying where it goes wrong, right?
Yeah. We
Any other
probably all
profession
have a couple of weaknesses. It's not that we're weak at all of
totally
them.
totally
We may not
and
realize it.
you know, any other profession, bridge builders, you know, if a piece of bridge falls down, yeah, they're going to research why that happens so that next time it doesn't happen again, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Why don't we do that in our industry?
It's basically a stress test before you build it.
Totally.
So, yeah.
It's
I
not
love that.
impossible, right?
Well, Ruud, we could
Yeah.
keep going on this for quite a while. These have been both great tips and some great stories along the way. So thank you for
Absolutely.
that. Before we close, I always
Yeah.
do a musical sign off. I want to ask you if we could try something creative because we're going to do this post event anyway. Would you be willing to play a minute on your Alp horn and send it to me? And then I'll play over it and include it in the post event recording. Is that something that you could do?
I will totally do that.
All right.
Word of warning, Phil. The Alp horn is an F sharp.
No worries. That's G sharp, A flat for me. No worries. I can handle
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
So don't keep it simple.
I think that would be phenomenal if we can do that. Let me send you. What I'll send you is the tune of the tune that we played for the Guinness Book of World Records. No, better yet, I'm going to send you something that we recorded at another event that was quite remarkable called the World Culture Festival.
Oh.
We held in Washington, D.C. And we played with 16 different Alphorn players. But after that, we played at the Reflection Pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
We played a tune called De Sonne Komt, which means the sun is coming.
Oh, nice.
So I will send that to you. It's voiced, so it's our group that's playing it, but it will be in 3 voices, and I think that will be a perfect piece for you to improvise over.
Yeah.
I can also send you the sheet music if that's helpful.
No.
But I think
Yeah.
with your auditive interpretation, you can totally jam on top of it.
I would rather, in this case, not have the music. I understand the value of having music, but in this particular case, I won't. So, folks, you need to stick around till the end. I will also have told you up front that you need to stick around to the end, but do so. Ruud, thank you very much. Let's just put a
My
pause
pleasure.
in for where we're going to put that. All right. So please tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you.
All right. So if you want to find me, just Google my name, Ruud Janssen. You will find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there on different channels. If you go to eventcanvas.org, you will find the event canvas, as well as you can download the first 100 pages of the Event Design Handbook, which explains how the event canvas works in practice, all the different steps that are there. From there, you'll also get instructions if you're interested to see the other half of the book. That's for sale at etco.global, at eventcanvas.org. You can get the book. There are a number of different books. There's a book called Design to Change about the conversations between the event owners and event designers that we wrote during COVID, as well as a little Drawing Out Change book, which is a 2-sided book about the experience design and instructional design with matching pages. And that comes with a little yellow pen for you to color in the things that are important to you, right? So no reason not to get started. There's also facilitation kits. We have an event design certificate program. We host one. The next upcoming one is going to be in San Diego, in your part of the world, Phil, at San Diego State University in January. We've been going there for the past 10 years. It's going to be cohort 59, I think, 59. And that's a place where you can learn how to become a facilitator of the process. It's 3 days plus 6 months of coaching. And if you do that successfully, then you become a CED, certified event designer. And then you can geek out on this stuff and bring it to your event owners.
Fantastic. Well, Ruud, thank you so much for being on the show. And folks, you need to follow him. I've got the book. I've heard about this. I've used some of the tools. It's very valuable. You will not regret it. So
Awesome.
Let's go.
Phil?
Yes, one more thing. Thanks for being on the show, man. Folks, let's go change the world one event at a time. See you next time.
Thank you.